Thank you for this introduction. I'm speaking to you from Monte Clérigo Beach in Algesur County in southwest Portugal. And before I start sharing my screen in my presentation and following Nigel's lines, I just want to say, well, just a couple of things, really. Well, first, thank you for letting me in this first minutes of your group talks, because for me as a Portuguese bird watcher, it's fascinating, the concept of bird groups, and I loved hearing the news of the week, and I would just love to have, I don't know how many people are well, at least 30 people here. I would love to have 30 other bird watchers to talk to in Zoom meetings like this about the birds I've seen last week. But we don't have that, that manpower here in Portugal. And so thank you for letting me be a part of this, a brief part of this. And just to say a few words, you talked about the BBNJ treaty, so the treaty to protect waters and biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. It was a big win for marine conservation. It's a first step. It's a vague first step, but it is a first step. It reminds us that we took 15 years of talking to give that first step, but it will make a difference. It's a UN thing, so it's not legally binding, but it will only be enforced when enough countries sign it, and that's about 40 or 50 countries. And but it's something that hopefully and it always amazes me how we reached this far without having an agreement like this, and half of the planet would be mostly an outlaw ocean. So it brings me great hope, but also some reservations onto how these marine protected areas will be, what will be. Is it sustainable use? Is it no-take? How will it be monitored? How it will be managed? All these things, but we'll be here to see how it goes. So without further ado, I was presented, my name is Nuno. I am a marine biologist and a bird watcher since pretty much I can remember. I live here in my hometown of Algesur, although I was brought up in Lisbon, and for the last 15 years of my life, I pretty much worked in marine and bird monitoring and conservation projects, and did some bird guiding for a few years. The last few years after COVID and after being a parent for the first time, I went back to conservation, mostly in sustainable fisheries and the impact of human activities in the marine environment. And that's all over now. So hopefully I'll be back to a more outdoor life now that life is allowing me a bit more to do so. So I'll share my screen. And you will hopefully see my presentation, which I will put on now. So I'll be talking to you about birds and bird migration in southwest Portugal. This is a bit of Sagres Peninsula with the lighthouse of Cape St. Vincent in the back. And this presentation will mostly have two geographical aspects. I will talk to you a bit about Algesur County, where I'm from and my family's from and where I live, which is the county north of Sagres. More like in a virtual tour of the best hotspots, and then I'll descend southwards to Sagres and be a bit more technical about the bird migration and some backstage information on the bird migration there. And yeah, that's pretty much the two parts of the presentation. So this is Algesur, my hometown. And I put this here as just an image to remind us that, you know, the landscape does have other aspects, not just the natural ones. And let me just take this thing out of here. Okay, so why southwest Portugal? So basically, we are in the tip of Europe, where there's a great diversity of species and habitats, a largely preserved landscape, because at least the coastal stripe is all a natural park. It's not a national park, it's a natural park, which is our own downgraded version of a national park. It's highly impacted, it has lots of tourism, but it's still largely preserved compared to what it would be if it wasn't the national protection. It has nice weather. Well, generally, it is southern Portugal, and it's pretty much springtime by here now. A low population density, so there's about 10,000 people living in these two counties, which is about 60 kilometers of coastline, something like that. Very interesting historical and gastronomical attributes, which is always an extra to the birding. And especially, I think this is a very good aspect. It's a short distance between hotspots. So in a 5-10 minute drive, you can visit lots of different habitats. And it does have other features, not just the birds. And I would add here marine life, both a bit offshore and also in the tidal pools, very rich, and the flora, because it is widely seen as a botanical hotspot. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's it. So this is the area I'm talking to you about. Pretty much the triangle between Algesur, Sagres, and this end of this green part here in Budens. So this is what I consider Southwest Portugal, well, to this presentation, so to say. And all this green stripe here is the coastal natural park. And this is, I'll show you 3 pictures that for me kind of define this region. So this is the west coast, facing the Atlantic, facing the predominant wind, which is from northwest. That fellow there is me, sea watching. This is in Cape St. Vincent, but it could be a little bit further to the north in Algesur. So this is a landscape of rough seas and tall cliffs and coastal vegetation. Then inland, in the center of this triangle, we have an area of hillsides with some scrubland, some mixed woodland, cork oak, strawberry trees. Mostly it's some patches of other types of forest and scrubland, but this is the landscape in the center of the area. And this is the south coast. It covers a bit like 15-20 kilometers of coastline of the south coast, the natural park. And this is a much more turquoise water, sheltered limestone cliffs, which is a completely different habitat, as you can see. So this is all very close to each other, and you can see this all in the morning, so to say. Obviously not investing lots of time in each habitat, but it's just a general picture for you to see the diversity of the area. So, overviews of Algesur and Sagres. Algesur is a place more for general naturalists and considered a very renowned botanical hotspot. There's not many bird watchers around. It's hard for me to think of another one other than me that lives here all year round, really. It has some small patches of original forest, which is, when I say original, it's really original forest. Small patches remain, which is mostly oak forest, juniper by the dunes. It is a climax ecosystem, although it's not tall trees. Alder by the riversides, and a few patches of ancient laurel forest still remain down in the steep creeks where, there was no human usage, basically. Great diversity of habitats. In the same road, you go through cliffs, estuary, pastures, dunes, pine forests, etc. And going down to Sagres, Sagres is a different area. It's a much more barren, shaped by the wind, open country landscape. It's the Portuguese hotspot for bird migration. It has a bit of west coast and south coast, and it's a much more explored area for naturalists. Algesur still has a few secrets. Well, I'll give you an example. I had a first official record of a wildflower in Algesur County this week, just inside my house, inside my patch. So this is how much it was common for me, but it wasn't documented. This is how much we don't know about Algesur. In Sagres, it's a much more explored area. So this is the place where I'm talking to you from. This is where I am right now, in my family house in Monte Clérigo Beach. And we'll start this virtual tour by the hillsides. Espinhaço de Cão, very difficult sentence to pronunciate, I know. But this is the hill chain that goes along the coastline of Algesur and Sagres. This is a place more for forest birds, and here are some examples. It's a place for woodpeckers. It's the only place in the area where we have lesser spotted woodpecker. Crested tits are well distributed in pretty much all the woodland, pine forests, but also other types of forest, mixed woodland, oak woods with strawberry trees, and Bonelli's eagles. Bonelli's eagles are very well established in South Portugal, at least in the Algarve hill chain. And they virtually have all the territory covered, and they are the winged predators, the resident winged predators of the Algarve inland area. Just a little bit further to the coast, we have an interesting estuary, which is the Algesur River mouth, a very beautiful little estuary just by the town of Algesur. And this is a place of great diversity. You start the road with in town, and then you go through pastures and agricultural fields, patches of alder forest, pine forest. Then it opens up into old rice fields that you see here, estuary vegetation, and then you have coastal dunes up to the cliffs. So you have pretty much everything in one road, really. Just a few examples of the common water birds you can see here, nothing out of the ordinary, I would say, but whimbrel and greenshank are probably the most abundant water birds. Iberian magpies all throughout the road. Kingfisher is always a plus, and I just put a picture of an osprey here for a reason. It's the only place in the area where ospreys winter. A few numbers, 1, 2, maybe 3. But Algesur is very well linked to ospreys because they now visit us in migration in winter, but they did breed all throughout the coastline. And the last breeding pair was in Algesur, in an islet off the coast. They are extinct as breeders since 1997. And I remember always having this idea as a kid of going to see the osprey's nest, and for many years it was the only one in the country. So it's a bird that is very tied to Algesur birding history, if there is an Algesur birding history. A little bit more inland, we have the area of Rugil, which is an area of open country and agricultural fields, resting fields, pastures, with some temporary ponds that flood in the wintertime and scarce pine trees. This is a place of more open country species. In Sagres, there's a small population, in Rugil another small population, but there are 2 small groups of little bustards that still dwell around southwest Portugal, away from the Alentejo, from their main stronghold in the center of Iberia. Resident little owls, wintering hen harriers, bee-eaters are a bit all over the place in springtime, but this in open country areas, it's usually an area where they hunt and nest. And this is the iconic views of Algesur. This is the coastline of the west coast of Algesur, which is pretty much the trademark of the place. I put this here just because of a special feature of this coastline, which is the white storks. I know white storks are not an uncommon thing, but in the coastline of Western Algarve and a bit of Western Alentejo, it's the only place in the world where they do this. You know, they nest in coastal islets in the marine environment, literally in the middle of the sea spray and the rough seas, and quite successfully, I have to say. And this is just a picture of one of them in the nest already late in the year. And now we go a little bit further south to Sagres, and this was just a small virtual tour of Algesur because, well, I had to really. And going to Sagres, this is the landscape of the southern-facing cliffs of Sagres in the autumn, in the time of the bird migration, when all the sea thrifts are dry but still remaining in the landscape here. And this is what Sagres is known for: the big flocks of soaring birds in the post-migration season, and we'll get to that. And this is what people know Sagres for in the birding world. There's virtually no one bird watching in Sagres throughout the year. A few groups go there in springtime, but and then in the post-breeding migration, everyone flocks there to see what's going on, because you never know what's going on, and that's one of the beauties of Sagres. There are timelines, there are calendars, but you need to be prepared for the unexpected, for the good and for the bad. But Sagres is not all about migration. There are resident birds. Coastal scrubland birds like Dartford warbler, small numbers, but they are doing well among all the Sardinian warblers that populate the coastline. It's one of the most common birds. Like I said, another small group of little bustards still breeds here. Iberian magpies are never far away. Cliff-dwelling breeding birds like blue rock thrush and peregrine falcon. And the choughs. I had to put a chough here because firstly, I love choughs, and it's pretty much a symbol of Sagres. When I had my one-man birding company, my symbol was a chough, because it's really a symbol of the southwest Portugal. They are tied to Sagres Peninsula. It's I wouldn't say definitely an isolated population, because there has been birds seen, you know, in odd places, but there's about 20-30 pairs in the Sagres Cliffs, and the nearest population is more than 400 kilometers to the north of Lisbon. And I remember them since starting my, bird watching trips when I was a teenager, and I could be independent and drive and go places to see birds. And it's always been a fascinating bird for me. And now I'm talking to you, and I remember I haven't seen one in a while, so I need to go to Sagres to take a look at them. Also, breeding birds. Well, it is kind of a microclimate here, the west coast of the Algarve. It's not as cold. It's colder. It's rougher than the south coast of the Algarve, where it generally is more touristical. But it's still southern Europe, so it's still very much southern European birds. Hoopoes, bee-eaters, swallows. They're pretty much everywhere by now. At least, red-rumped swallow I haven't seen one, but they'll be arriving soon. Tawny pipits. It's one of the specialties of Sagres open country areas. Cory's shearwaters, although they don't breed, they breed in the nearest place they breed is in an island north of Lisbon. They are a very common presence in the breeding season in the waters around Sagres. I put a spectacle warbler here because it's one of those curious birds that there's still a few that breed in Sagres Peninsula. It's an area where you wouldn't expect them to be, but Sagres is a special place. And also the wintering birds. So I'll be talking to you a little bit further along this presentation about the dynamics of the bird movements here, but there is a lot of birds even outside migration season in the peak of winter in Sagres. Wintering hen harriers, we have very interesting passage numbers and wintering numbers of northern gannets. Depending on the days, it can be spectacular. Richard's pipits, in their western expansion, they chose a few spots in well, it's very far away from their usual range, but in their expansion westwards, they pick a few spots in Sagres to spend the winter. There's always one or two birds there that can be seen. Also, lots of finches that flock here because it's the end of the world, and they just keep roaming south, and they come here and they come and go. So there's lots of finches in the winter, and also some cliff specialities like alpine accenter and ringed ousel. The alpine accenters are never many, just a few, but they can be seen in Cape St. Vincent and only in Cape St. Vincent, in the cliffs of the Cape itself. Ringed ousels are also a very special bird for me. I like them a lot, and they come here following the juniper berries that are ripe when they arrive in October, November, and they go through the coastal dunes in the well-established juniper areas, searching for the berries, and it's always an interesting bird to look for in the coastline, because you can search for them for a day or two and not find them, and then find lots of them in one day, because they're just searching for the berries, and their movements are not very well predictable, so to say. But going to the migration part, the spring migration, like in any place in Western Europe, is not so spectacular. Mostly from March to May, but I bet in a few days the first odd migrants will show up in Sagres if there's someone there to see them. The problem is there's never anyone there to see them at this time of the year. But it's not our abundance of migrants in Sagres Peninsula depends a lot of the eastern winds. And in a day with a lot of if there's persistent eastern winds for 2 or 3 days, then a few odd migrants show up in the peninsula. Witch-head shrikes, black-eared wheatears, and those are 2 odd birds that I remember that can show up in spring migration. But it's not a robust and an abundant movement of birds throughout the area. The post-breeding migration is, and it is in a wide period of time. I would say that the first sign of migration is usually black kites, already in July. Even in early July, you can already, mid-July, sometimes you can see up to 10 black kites flocking, and that's a sign that slowly things will pick up. August is usually a slow month, but from mid-August, you can already start seeing some passerines and some little things moving through. And this lasts with its own dynamic until pretty much until winter, almost winter time. So late November, early December, there are birds passing through the peninsula, and with a peak in September and October. So these are mostly long-distance trans-Saharan migrants, so birds going through the area from North and Central Europe to mostly tropical Africa. And then the second wave is dispersing and wintering birds, birds with no well-defined wintering grounds, whose wintering distribution depends a lot on food and territory availability. Juvenile birds in search for food, in some years maybe they don't go this far, some years they do. These are birds roaming southwards, basically. And when they reach Sagres, well, their world ends, so to say. So they tend to gather there, figuring out what to do next. And why Sagres? Most of you probably know this, but it's never too too much to refer. I put this map here just to illustrate the main migratory routes of Europe. So you have the Bosphorus for birds of Eastern Europe, spectacular migration, and then you have the Strait of Gibraltar for the birds of Western Europe, and these are the two main ones. Then you have that secondary route through the Strait of Messina in Italy, but it's still a long way to go. But none of these routes goes through Sagres or even through Portugal. Although birds are here, but they are mostly juvenile birds, wintering, dispersing birds, and most of the birds that go through are soaring birds and passerines. And although there are usually in the Portugal Tourism Board or the local municipality, when they are promoting bird watching and this sort of thing, is usually they like saying that Sagres is the main migratory route of the birds that go through Portugal and things like that. Well, the truth is not as glamorous as that. Sagres is not a migratory bird route. Sagres is a notorious migration dead end for Western Europe. Which doesn't make it less spectacular. It's just that the birds are lost. There's no other way to put it. They come here because they didn't get their way right. And why does this happen? Because this is an aerial view of the peninsula. So this is the town of Sagres, Cape St. Vincent in the back, two other headlands facing south. So basically birds, young birds, inexperienced migrants, birds that are weak in somehow, they tend to follow the coastline and coastal valleys. And this channels birds to the peninsula. If they overshoot their main route to the Strait of Gibraltar, if they get blown away by eastern winds, and if they follow the coastline of the Algarve, they end up in Sagres as well. So there's many ways they can reach Sagres. Sagres is just a laboratory, a test tube for a much wider movement of birds throughout Portugal. And they kind of flock there trying to figure out what to do next, really, because they're lost. So from here, and depending on the weather, depending on the conditions in that day, depending on the species of bird, on the state of the birds, they can disperse back north. That's more true for the wintering birds and the birds roaming, searching for territories. They can attempt to cross, and we have seen birds trying this at least in the first stage of the trip, trying to cross, but it's still a long way. It's 400 kilometers to Morocco, and it's just 11 or 14 or something in the Strait of Gibraltar. Or it's a long way, or they can go east, southeast to find the right way along the coastline of the Algarve to Gibraltar. This is what I tend to believe that most of the birds do. Even if they spend some time in Sagres, eventually I think they at least most of them, of what we know of birds that were tracked and went through the peninsula, they eventually find their way. This is just my old logo is still there, the chef I was telling you about. This is just an example of a classical movement of a bird going through Sagres. So this is a short-toed eagle that was born in southern Italy. I mean, southern Italy is very close to the Strait of Messina. This bird could have just tried to cross 140 kilometers, but it preferred to go north through the Alps, through southern France, through the Pyrenees, through Iberian Peninsula, to two birds. And one of the birds followed the Mediterranean coast of Spain and crossed in Gibraltar. The other bird followed the Central Iberian mountain chains, ended up a bit western of the strait, and instead of going east, it went west, and when it went west, it reached the sea in the west coast of the Algarve or the west coast of the Alentejo, and from here it went down to Sagres. stayed a while, and then eventually, as you can see, followed the coastline of the Algarve to the east, finding the way to the strait and going to tropical Africa. So this is a much longer route for these two birds, but they preferred to take it than to cross the ocean. As you know, I mean, crossing the ocean is very hard for a land bird. The passerines can't stop flying. They can't stop flying, really. And for the soaring birds, they don't have the ascending thermals to push them up so they can glide. So they have to beat their wings all the way through and spend a lot of energy. So it was more profitable for these birds to do this big route. One of the birds found the right way straight away. The other one had to go to Sagres to find the right way. Another two examples. These are all booted eagles that were tracked in Spain. And these ones didn't come to Portugal at all. They found their way. But there's an osprey here from Scotland, I believe, that crossed the whole of the Bay of Biscay, crossed through Wales, and then crossed the Iberian Peninsula through inland Portugal, and enhancing this movement. On the 14th of September, this bird ended up in Rio Formosa, which is the main estuary area of southern Portugal. This is a wide area of barrier islands and a lot of salt marshes. And then instead of going to the strait, it went west along the Algarve and reached Sagres. And when it reached Sagres, it got confused. And then it went east again and spent some time, at least 2 weeks, here in a small estuary area around Portimão, which is a much smaller estuary, but still with suitable habitat. And then we have a point out at sea. So maybe this bird attempted to cross. So this is just another example of a bird reaching Sagres because it overshot its course somehow. And this is a view of Sagres Peninsula with its various hotspots. I mean, the most you would travel between these hotspots is 5 minutes by car. This is a small area. And you have Cape St. Vincent facing west. You have Ponta da Atalaia, this headland here facing south. You have a small fishing harbor, which is a good place to look for gulls and waders. Martinhal is also a small coastal pond, so to say, of brackish water. Eventually some waders end up there as well. And then you have Val Santo, which is this big area of open fields where the little bustards still dwell. And this is a wide area, and where you have Cabranosa, which is this little place, which is a vantage point, just a small hillside, very, very small, but still it oversees the peninsula. And this is where the bird watchers meet. This is per se the point to see bird migration in Sagres. If you go there on a normal day, there's a couple of guys there, in the autumn, because they work for the windmill farms. There's most of the knowledge that we know, the detailed knowledge that we know, is because for the last 15 years, 15 years, for the last 15 years, there's been people monitoring the migration in Sagres every day from August to November. And this is because there's a windmill farm about 20 kilometers northeast, which is in the main valley that channels the birds to the peninsula. And as a compensatory measure, because they know they shouldn't have done it, there's a team of bird watchers around the windmill farms with a radar upstream of the movement of the birds and a control point in Sagres. And if these guys have the power to, under certain criteria, 10 birds of this species, 1 bird of this species, and according to their evaluation of the local weather, the type of flight, hour of the day, maneuverability of the bird, they can press a button and stop the park if they sense there is danger. And now another park does it as well, and these are the only two parks in Portugal that do it. So there's always at least two guys, one from each company, in Sagres detailing all the bird movements that occur there. And this has brought a lot of knowledge. It's the only place in Portugal where this happens. It's just a lovely place to go to, really, and chat about birds. This is what it looks in a very, 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 very busy day. Sagres was put on the map for bird watchers about 10, 12 years ago, because there is now a bird migration festival there. This is what it looks in a busy day. So there's lots of activities going on. This is in the first weekend of October. Most of the activities are free, others are paid, but it's an event for bird watchers and naturalists to explore the birds and the nature of the peninsula with the flag of the bird migration. This is the little vantage point, and there's everyone looking at the sky trying to find birds. And what birds are they looking for? Well, mostly soaring birds and raptors is what attracts people here. There's 35 species in total that have been recorded in Sagres, which is pretty much all the Portuguese cast of raptors. Every raptor species that has been recorded in Portugal has been sighted in Sagres as well. And we are talking throughout the season about 4,000 to 6,000 birds. This is about 1 to 2% of the birds that go through the Strait of Gibraltar. I know the number is not impressive, but it's how the birds show up that is interesting. So the most common species, I would say 80% of the birds that show up in Sagres are griffon vultures, short-toed eagles, booted eagles, common buzzards, black kites, and sparrowhawks. This is the stronghold, obviously with different timings and with different patterns, but this is most of the birds that go through. But what happens in Sagres is that when they reach the Tarifa and the places in before the Strait of Gibraltar, the birds tend to go as high as they can, so they can at least attempt to cross in one go of glide. In Sagres, this doesn't happen. In Sagres, they are as low as they can be because, well, they are lost. They are very close to the sea. They are not really aiming at going anywhere. They're just trying to realize what's happening. So they can get really low. And the beauty of it is that it's not a bird supermarket, so to say. I mean, it's completely unpredictable. The movements are well defined, and the timings of the different species are scientifically studied, but still there is lots of surprises. On a good day, you can get 12 to 15 species just sitting on that vantage point. This is, I would say, late September till mid-October. The record is 21 species in one day, from 21 species of soaring birds. Soaring birds, I'm including raptors, storks, and ravens. This 21 species was in 15th of October 2009. I remember this day very well. I was lucky enough to be the guy in service counting them. So a few examples of other birds that show up: black storks, usually, eagles, short-tailed eagles, Egyptian vultures, honey buzzards. It's really a nice thing to see, and on a good day, it's quite busy. But you're always looking for birds. You're always trying to figure out where the next birds will come from, because they can show up from anywhere. It's not a highway. They can come from the east. They can come from north. You have to be alert. This is just a little exercise I did a while ago, a few years ago. This yellow and red thing. Imagine every column is a 2-week period, from mid-August to the end of November. And every line is a different species of soaring bird. And so in yellow, you have the passage times. So, and in red, you have the peaks. And as you can see, some birds don't have a very well-defined peak. I don't know, peregrine falcons. I mean, you have the resident population, you have the dispersing birds. They can show up at any time. But then you have very well-established peaks for some birds. Honey buzzards, they show up from the very beginning. From mid-August, there's already honey buzzards going through. Mid-October is already late for them, but they do have a peak in the last 2 weeks of September. Common buzzards, they are more late in the season. These are much more a late October, early November bird. Red kites are the first. Black kites are the first. Red kites are some of the last. They have their peak in November. Booted eagles have their peak in mid-season, so last 2 weeks of September and early October. Short-toed eagles are very curious because they have 2 peaks. There's a very well-defined peak in the beginning of October, and then in November, also another peak. And then you have the peak of griffon vultures, which we'll be talking a bit after this slide, I think, which is mostly in October, but also in early November. And here they are, griffon vultures. I'm just giving a slide to them and talking a bit about them because, I mean, this is the flagship bird of the bird migration in Sagres. Half of those 4,000 to 6,000 birds I told you about are griffon vultures. So this is the main event, the arrival of the griffons. These are mostly Iberian birds, which the stronghold population, the breeding population is in Spain. And they start coming from, I would say, early to mid-October. Suddenly the first ones show up, small groups. They come from the hill chains they come direction southwest to Sagres. And first you see, in one day, you see 5, 10 birds. And what happens is they keep coming back and calling their friends. And then they go, and then in 2 or 3 days later, they show up and there are already 20, 30 birds. And then they show up, they go back, they come and there are already 100, 200 birds, big groups. And then you have 1 or 2 big flocks. And the big flock it's something that can be in Sagres in some years it doesn't even reach Sagres. They turn to the east or or they turn back a bit before they reach Sagres. But in a good year, I would say the main group of griffon vultures is in a medium year, it's okay, let's start. On a bad year, it's like 800 birds. On a good year, it can be up to 2,000 birds. And they can go through very high, they can go through very low if it's wind, or if they reach Sagres by the end of the day, or if it's cloudy, they're much more spectacular to see. But I don't know if you've ever seen something like this, but it can be just half an hour that you see it, but it's the peak, the highlight of the whole 4 months of passage, because I mean, these are birds that are 2 meters across, flying usually low and completely silent. I've had bird watchers, dropping their binoculars and just staying immobile looking at them because they don't make a sound, and you can have 1,000 vultures over your head, and it's quite a thing to see. Now, scaling down on size of the bird, at least, to the passerine migration. These are literally millions of birds that go through the area after dusk. They arrive in August, start arriving in August, but September is their main month, and they go until mid-October. The trans-Saharan migrants I'm talking about. And those calm late afternoons where you can feel it's going to be a great migration night. You can feel the pulse of the birds just waiting for the sundown to just shoot. The most notorious and probably the most common species that go through are willow warbler, spotted and pied flycatcher, windchats, common redstart, yellow wagtail, and northern wheatear. Bear in mind that hardly any of these species actually breed in Portugal. So for us, it's the only time of the year that we see them, and suddenly they're everywhere. So it's and you can go to sleep, and there's lots of windchats, and then you wake up the next day, all the windchats are gone, and it's lots of yellow wagtails that arrived overnight. And then by mid-month in October, this curve starts decreasing, and then as this curve decreases, the other curve increases. So the second big wave of birds arriving in Sagres and in southwest Portugal in general, it's just that Sagres is more notorious, is the wintering birds. So suddenly you start having blackcaps and robins everywhere, and they weren't there. And all the thrushes, finches, there's a misspelling here, finches and corn buntings start showing up. Also the pipits, meadow pipits everywhere. And it's just lovely to see the days in between these two big waves. Usually there's like a calm before the storm. There's a few quiet days in middle October in the passerine world when the raptors are peaking, and then the wintering birds arrive. I just put this here because, well, basically because I love northern wheatears, but it's because it's a bird that doesn't breed in Portugal. It did breed in North Portugal, a few in the extreme north of Portugal, but not anymore, I think. And we take them for granted because, I mean, they're everywhere in October. But it's never too late to remind ourselves that birds from Eastern Canada also go to Africa, and they can do this movement through Britain and then to West Africa on a 3-day diagonal cross of the Atlantic Ocean in a non-stop flight, which is just amazing. And the Alaskan birds do twice that journey through land, crossing the whole of Asia to winter in Eastern Africa. I mean, this is a small bird, and it's most people know it's a migration champion, but for me, it's really the symbol of the passerine migration. So just a few pictures of birds, of migrants, of the most common ones, the pied flycatcher, yellow wagtails, common redstarts, then the wintering birds, thrushes, finches. I put a subalpine warbler here because it's also, I wouldn't say common passage bird, but it's just an example of one of those species that you can really find any day during the season, and there's a lot of them. And you don't go to see the migration just to see the most common birds. You know, it's the most notorious movements, but you're always looking for the scarcer ones. And this is not even one of the scarcer ones, but there's also lots of things to find. The subalpines, white throats, and things like that. Well, I'll have to talk a bit about the sea because I'm a sea person. It's also a spectacular place for seabird migration. Birds crossing between North and South Atlantic, in and out of the Med, going to their wintering grounds in West Africa, around the coast of Mauritania mostly. Cape St. Vincent is usually the best place for sea watching, but also the south-facing headland in Sagres is good. And I have another one here close to my house in Algesur, which is also good, which is Ponta da Atalaia. Again, like the stronghold of the seabird migration is a few species, but then anything can show up. I would say most of the birds that go through are northern gannets, corys and Balearic shearwaters, lesser black-backed gulls, and great skuas. These are like the top five seabirds that go through. And then, I'm sorry, I have I have stray cats in my house that just are having a bit of a fight with each other. They're not mine. Some seabirds. So Corey's shearwaters, great skuas, northern gannets, Balearic shearwaters. It's a great place to see Balearic shearwaters. It's one of those birds that is a bit different because we know it's critically endangered, and but it's quite common actually to see them in the coast of Portugal. Also, the birds that do the southern Atlantic breeders that do use our waters in the summer in their non-breeding season, in our breeding season, which is the Wilson storm petrel and the great shearwaters. These ones you don't get so much near the coast, but you do get them on pelagic trips. And the puffins, a common wintering and spring passage, but well, not common, but I would say that in a strong wind, harsh winter day, when you really don't want to go sea watching, that's the days where you'll get most puffins. Also, some rare and uncommon birds to be seen. Obviously, it's not just common birds. It's not just the common birds. So pectoral sandpipers here is an example of one of the most common among the uncommon, among the vagrants in the waders. Eleonora's falcon. This is a bird that can be, it's a regular bird that is seen every year, but about 5-6 birds per season. Ruppel's vulture, usually among the big, this is something I didn't say to you, usually among the big groups of griffon vultures, there's always something else. Ruppel's vultures are usually there because the birds that cross, when they cross to Africa, they usually, when they come back, they usually bring 1 or 2 friends. And also sometimes in the middle of all that mess of birds spiraling up in the sky, there's usually booted eagles, sometimes imperial eagles, Bonelli's eagles, other big raptors that just went for the ride. Dotterels, this is another bird that is usually never seen in Portugal, but in Sagres it's usually always in the same week in the same place. Very, 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 very predictable, so to say. I put a rock here because it's one of those birds that, I mean, it's completely out of habitat, completely out of route, but they do show up. It's one of those birds that I've seen at least twice in Sagres, and I would consider it, although it's not a rare bird for Portugal because they do breed in the mountains of the north, it's a rare bird for Sagres, and just a sign that everything can show up there. And I put a red-breasted flycatcher here, just you know, it's one of those rare birds that people chase. I'm not really a rare bird chaser, but I do enjoy my rarities. And just a small reminder, we do talk about migration season, but in December, there are still short-toed eagles crossing. But in January, there are already many barn swallows and white storks that are back. So this means that, you know, we have pretty much migration all year round. There's always birds on the move in Sagres. There's never a dull moment, so to say. But I could finish my presentation here, but I decided to keep going for 2 or 3 more slides, just so that you have, well, the notion that I'm not such a bird nerd as I sound, and that there are more things to see in Sagres. In Sagres in southwest Portugal in general. I would say I've been a bird watcher all my life, but if I would try to be neutral, I would have to say that the 3 main attributes, the 3 specialities of the wildlife around here is the wildflowers, especially the coastal dunes, the coastal dune wildflowers. Also the birds, namely the bird migration, and the marine wildlife. This is the aspect of early spring coastal dune in a coastal path. with all the snapdragons and yellow sisters and sea thrifts, and what else can we see here? And milk vetches and things like that flowering. This is pretty much how it looks now. Yeah, it's pretty much how it looks now. And this is in springtime, you can go through one of these coastal paths and just spend an hour in 10 meters, just trying to identify everything and being amazed with all the flowers. I just put a few examples here. I put this yellow thing here is the Biscutella vicentina, which is just an example of a local endemic species. So there's about 10 species of plants that are local endemics. They just occur in the cliffs of Algesur and Sagres. Also, you have the regional and national endemics. I put this Algarve toadflax here, this purple thing here, as just an example. And also, obviously, the orchids. And I chose here the two-leaf genaria and the sawfly orchid because it's two species that are out now. I mean, it's early March, so we're heading towards our floral peak, which would be about late March, early April, and it's getting pretty spectacular out there. In the world of little flying things, a few butterflies, there's lots of things, but I put here a two-tailed pasha because it's an iconic butterfly of the inland area of the hillsides where the strawberry trees are, and Province hairstreak, which it's one of those little elusive butterflies that dwell in the coastal dunes that are pretty much will start flying soon. Regarding dragonflies, it's not really my thing, but I had to put a red-veined darter here because their migration through southwest Portugal is just spectacular. In October, mid-October, they have days where they just go through by the tens of thousands, and it's incredible, an incredible movement of red-veined darters, more or less in the peak of bird migration. And for the ones who know it, caterpillar of death's head hawk moth, which a big wonderful thing also to look for also during bird migration season. And of course, I had to end with a bit of marine life. There are pelagic trips going through the area, going in the area from Sagres Harbor. Dolphins, common dolphin is the species that you encounter 80% of the time, but also chances of bottlenose dolphins, minke whales, fin whales. If you're lucky enough for a couple of days, well, about 5-6 days a year, you do see orcas going in and out of the Mediterranean, chasing the tunas. So it's, and of course, there's all the seabirds. So a pelagic trip from Sagres is also something worth exploring. And that's it. I have not much else to say. So I hope you enjoyed it and got a bit more knowledgeable about at least Southwest Portugal and flora and fauna here.
Thank you very much indeed, Nuno. And Diolch, as we say here in Wales. That was fab. Thank you so much for adding those extras at the end on the insects, the plants, and other wildlife. That really just completed it. Super. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but whilst people are preparing those, during your talk, Julian Hughes, who's the RSPB officer for Wales, got in touch through the chat. He's part of the audience this evening to mention an extraordinary event involving a hen harrier that was breeding in North Wales and then made a migration out into the North Atlantic before realizing its mistake and turning southeast to the coast of Portugal, just south of Lisbon, and then spending the rest of the winter close by you in the Algarve, which sounds a miraculous adjustment and a happy conclusion for it, I think. But yeah, one of many examples that you referred to this evening of the link between us here in Wales and you down there in southern Portugal. Are there any questions for Nuno? I'd like to ask you about avian flu, Nuno. Has that raised its awful head in your part of Portugal?
I would have to say no, because like I told you in the beginning, at least, I don't know, at least I get more news about seabirds than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it has taken its toll in the colonies. Well, seabirds are really getting it from all sides, aren't they? But we don't have cliff nesting birds in Portugal, and the only birds the only pelagic seabirds that breed are Cory's shearwaters and Madeiran storm petrels, and I haven't heard anything from those.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to say it went rather. There wasn't many news about that. What I know is, I don't know if you had it there, but at least here in January, we had big wrecks of puffins. Lots of puffins ending up in beached, and usually this happens, but this year was completely abnormal. There was some speculation, but up till now, the birds that were tested didn't have avian flu. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty much weather and not having clear water to feed and battling the weather, basically. Mm-hmm. So it hasn't been an issue to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because as you say, they've got enough pressures as it is. And I think wrecks of seabirds, including puffin, occurred on other coastlines in Britain this winter, but not, thankfully, here in North Wales. We escaped that.
There were two questions I asked. The first one was actually, you mentioned that ospreys no longer breed in the area. I just wondered if there was a reason behind that. So that's one question. The second question was, are you seeing any changes in terms of the species of birds that are wintering with you, perhaps in preference to migrating to Africa as Europe becomes a bit warmer?
Well, the first question, there were birds, the historical records say that birds spread throughout, pretty much scattered all throughout the coastline, at least in the beginning of the 20th century, in the cliffs. And I would have to say that it was pretty much pressure, both from fisheries and people and disturbance of just people walking through and walking around cliffs. The last pair bred in an islet just off the coast where I am, and one of the adults of that pair died in a fishing line, recreational fisheries. So there's been lots of speculation about reintroducing ospreys, but the general view is that the threats that caused their extinction are even worse now. So there has been once a bird that successfully nested in that same spot about 5 years ago, which is incredible. I mean, from all the places of Portugal that it could have chosen to breed, it bred in the last place where a pair bred 20 years before. And then there's been a project to try to reintroduce it in a very wide lagoon, a very wide dam inland in Portugal. It had some success for a few years, but then it died off. I think it was just the dream of a lifetime of one person, and that was about it. So I would say that there's no way they're going back to the coastline, at least. And if there's any changes in the movements of some birds, well, I think generally speaking, groups like herons are definitely heading north. There's quite a speculation about white storks, and we have many white storks that remain, that don't cross. I don't know exactly if I can link that to climate change. The thing is, I mean, they do have food, mostly because of that Louisiana crayfish, the invasive crayfish in the rivers. I would say that it's still early to tell, but what I can tell you is there are more and more storks staying. There are more and more hoopoes staying. And generally speaking, obviously this is always distorted by your notion of the weather when you're a child, which is something that I'm sure it has many distortions, but I don't see many patterns of migration of birds changing. But I do feel, at least in this specific area, the winters are definitely milder. And you can see the numbers of I can tell you at least these two species, white storks and hoopoes, they're definitely staying, more birds are staying behind.
Well, thank you for that full answers there.
Thanks a lot.
Very, very interesting. Thanks, Martin, too. I'd just like to say that Gillian Hughes, who I mentioned, has got a map to share with you and with all of us of the movement of that remarkable hen harrier.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you, Nuno, because that was a fantastic talk. Really enjoyed that. Looking forward to coming back to your country again soon. I just thought I'd share this map because I thought you would be interested in it, but so will probably be many of the people in the audience, because this is a hen harrier that most of our hen harriers winter either within Wales, southwest England, or France, at the very most northern Spain, the ones from Wales. But we've been satellite tracking a number of hen harriers from North Wales over the last few summers. And this is a bird called Surcas that hatched in Eryri in the mountains in northwest Wales in summer 2021, so 2 summers ago. And then he made this incredible journey out over the sea. And if we didn't have these stopping points, or not these stopping points, these points at which the satellite checked in, I don't think anybody would actually believe that this was doable for a bird of prey, for exactly the reasons. And I was reminded, your osprey map reminded me of this. That's the reason I suggested we put this up, because you can see it went right out into the Atlantic, and you know it was doomed. It was doomed, but it made a turn at the right moment. It didn't rush back to the Portuguese coast. It went off in this southeast bearing, came ashore just south of Lisbon, and then spent the whole of the winter 21-22, down not far from you, I guess, down in southern Portugal, just to the north of where you've been talking about tonight. Unfortunately, there is a sad end to this tale, because just at the point it would have been ready to come back, about this time last year in March 2022, it went offline in suspicious circumstances, and RSPB did get in touch with the Portuguese conservation police, the Portuguese conservation officers from government, and they went out and tried to find the carcass and tried to find the tag. They were unable to do so, so we didn't get it back. So we don't know what happened, but the satellite tracker was operating perfectly normally and had been right through the winter until the moment it stopped. So it we do wonder what happened to it. It was a bit odd, a real shame, because that was on the brink of coming back and might maybe potentially nesting here. They don't always nest in the first year, in their second calendar year, but who knows? But I just thought you'd be interested in that, because it's a really nice connection between where we are tonight and where you are tonight.
No, thank you. It is. I'm sorry for the bird, but if it's of any comfort, the area it's quite a wide area where it spent the winter, but it's a good area. I think he had a nice winter, the nice last winter of his life, because at least in some of these areas there is an area managed for conservation here, which is Castro Verde Plains, which is the stronghold of all the pseudo-steppe birds of Portugal. It did venture in a much wider area than this, but it's a good area for them to winter. And the marine expedition it undertook is just amazing. I have to say, this is one of the things. It's one of those aspects of ornithology, if I can call it that, that just fascinates me, which is the marine records of land birds. It's amazing. I spent a lot of time at sea already. Some of it quite offshore, and I mean, I've seen, peregrine falcon. I can recall an encounter with a peregrine falcon and another encounter with a long-eared owl, at least 100 miles offshore.
Amazing. Amazing. Can I just ask you, Nuno, as a follow-up to that, do you see hen harriers in your part of Portugal very frequently, or are they quite rare?
No, I do see them in the winter. It's not very abundant. They do occur in Sagres Peninsula near me in an open field area. You go there, they are there. But I would say it's few numbers of birds. I would say in the area where this bird wintered, it's much more abundant in the winter.
Right. Excellent. Oh, well, that's great. That's really nice. Really nice to have some local insight into where it spent its winter. Thank you.
Yeah. Nigel, could I just ask, actually, building on Julian's comment about the bird being lost, is there a problem with persecution of birds in Portugal? I mean, we've had speakers from places like Malta where they're battling constantly in terms of people killing birds and taxidermy and stuffing birds. And I just wondered actually what position, is it more enlightened in Portugal?
Yeah, it's not as bad. I mean, Malta and Cyprus are the worst places for that. But I think shooting of raptors is not so, it was more of a problem in the 20th century. I don't bet that it doesn't occur anymore. I mean, there's lots of hunters around, but it's not a thing, it's not something that is common practice. But it does still happen. I wouldn't say it's a major problem. The local bird life partner, Portuguese Society for the Study of Birds, has been trying to do some work on that. The problem is there's no capacity of the law enforcement to really know anything about this problem, and it's not something that really interests them. The main problem, I would say, is not so much with the raptors, but with the passerines. So trapping is still a thing. The people do still trap birds in little metal traps, looking like mouse traps, also with others with that type of glue thing. Not as bad as in France, but still bad, and still in the, we're talking still in the estimates are still thousands of birds that can be trapped, especially in the hill chains of central south Portugal. And people still, there are some people that still consider it a snack.
Oh, thank you, Nuno. I think there are some more questions that Gary can articulate through the chat. If you wouldn't mind.
There's been a couple of questions in the chat. So Gareth is asking, what have the number of great skewers been like this year compared to other years?
Well, I would love to be able to answer that, because it would mean that I did a bit of sea watching. And what happens is I can't answer that because it's too specific. And I spent the last 2 or 3 years of my life not doing so much sea watching. So, and also taking care of a 3-year-old girl. So that has been taking quite a toll in my outdoor life. So I really don't know the numbers of skuas in the last season. From what I know, there isn't a red flag, so to say, but maybe I missed it.
Okay, no problem. And Barbara's asking if you could say a bit more about the coastal breeding white storks. Do they mix with other populations on migration and in winter, or are they completely discrete from other populations all year round?
Well, there are not many. I would say we're talking about, probably that number is more accurate than what I would say, but some tens of birds, I don't know, 50, 60 pairs, something like that, having that habit. Some of them are ringed, so you do see them feeding. From my experience, they go, they don't stay. At least I don't see them during the winter time. I would say that they go in August and they are back before Christmas, which is basically what the majority of the storks here in Portugal do. So I wouldn't say that they are doing anything different than the others. No one really knows why this happened. What people speculate is that during the time of the Portuguese dictatorship, at least in southern Portugal, there was this big incentive for people to grow cereal. There was this big nationalist thing of not depending from other countries and planting your own cereal. So there was a lot of chopping down big trees. And people think that some storks that lost their main breeding trees adapted for some reason to these coastal islets and this coastal inaccessible cliffs, and then it perpetuated. But there's not a proved scientific reason.
Oh, thank you for that extra details. It's fascinating. Of course, now we have a few pairs of white storks breeding in southern England, Nuno, but they were introduced, though they're now established on their own in southeast England. Yeah. So we look forward to having them as a permanent breeding species in our avifauna again. Are there any more questions? Perhaps one more final question before we close this evening. Well, not to worry, because we've had some great questions and some fab answers after an amazing talk, I think what came over for me, and I'm sure everybody else that listened to you, was first of all, your really deep, intense knowledge and love of your part of Portugal. It came over so loud and clear, particularly Algeciras. What a place. It sounds heaven. I would love to visit it as much for the plants as the birds. And thank you for including information on all aspects of natural history. You have a huge insight into the ecology and the wildlife of your natal area. And it's always great to hear from an expert about a particular area. You've delighted us with that this evening, but you've also very cleverly highlighted so many links that I think many of us probably hadn't thought of before between your part of Portugal and our part of Wales, here in North Wales, particularly those coastal links of birds and wildlife. We too have fabulous sand dunes with species of ophrys on them. We too have chough, and in fact, rather as the chough is the symbol for your birdland company, chough is the symbol for our Bangor Bird Group organisation. And it's lovely to meet with somebody whom chough is central to their lives and who share such a great love of what is such an evocative bird of coast and mountain. And mountain birds like ring-ouzel, we have them here in North Wales. They're doing reasonably well. Good to hear about yours. And I suspect ring-ouzels will have fed on upland juniper bushes in Snowdonia and then come and eaten some juniper berries in your part of the world. It'd be nice to think so anyway. But that link between the two areas really was fascinating, both in, particularly in terms of migration, and certainly the hen harrier journey really epitomized that common linkage and ongoing new information that we can glean nowadays through satellite tagging and extra monitoring of these birds. So that was really deeply pleasing to hear you so eloquently and lucidly articulating those links and revealing them to us. Your English is fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. It was an exemplary talk in every way. The images were very, very good. It's just the most ideal way to spend an evening. So, sitting here listening to you in the comfort of our living room about such a fascinating area. I want to wish you all the very best with more field work for you over the coming years, because it really needs people like yourself in the field, seeing the birds, monitoring them, documenting them, and as I think was alluded to at the beginning, your ability to enthuse others through your knowledge in the field. I hope that you get as much opportunity to do that with people of all age, resident and tourists, because they will surely benefit in a huge way. I'm quite certain as a result of your talk this evening that many of us will want to visit Sargés as soon as possible. And if we do, I hope we'll bump into each other. It would be great to meet you on your home patch. But equally, if you are able to get back to Britain, I hope you will. I believe that on your wife's side, there is a Welsh connection. Then please do let us know, and we'd be more than happy to show you our part of North Wales. So thank you on behalf of all of the group. Diolch yn fawr iawn. It's been a wonderful evening.
Well, thank